everyone, welcome back to Lingua Framed, the channel that breaks down how language is used and misused in the media we love. I'm Summer, and I'm here with some amazing co-hosts to dive into a topic that doesn't get nearly enough attention, AAVE, or African American Vernacular English, and how it shows up in movies and media. Trust us, this is a big one. Today, we're talking about how AAV is used, misused, and often misunderstood in some of your favorite films.
Hey guys, it's Hallie. I'm pumped for this discussion because language in movies is super powerful. It shapes how we see characters and how they see themselves. And when it comes to AAVE, the impact is even bigger. It affects casting, stereotypes, and so much more.
And I'm Paige. This combo is close to my heart because AAVE isn't just a way of speaking, it's a whole culturally identity rooted in its history and community.
I'm Braden, the token dude of the panel. But I swear I've got thoughts. AAVE's role and how people of color are portrayed on screen. Yeah, it's something we really need to talk about.
Exactly. So buckle up. We're about to break down how AAVE shows up in films, from stereotype to authenticity, and what that means for real life perceptions. We've got clips and examples from Clueless, The Princess and the Frog, Black Panther, and more. You don't want to miss this.
And while we're calling out the negatives like stereotypes and appropriation, we're also shining a light on the positive shifts happening in media. Things are changing, and this conversation matters. So, welcome to our video. The problem with street talk in film. Let's talk AAVE.
Let's start with the basics. AAVE stands for African American Vernacular English, and it's a rich and unique dialect that has deep roots in the African American community, but it's often misunderstood by mainstream society. AAVE isn't just slang, it's a legitimate, fully developed dialect with its own grammatical rules and structure, and yet it's often treated as incorrect or improper English.
Exactly. And when it comes to movies, AAVE is often used in ways that pigeonhole Black characters into narrow stereotypes, and this often results in typecasting. For example, you can watch almost any movie with a Black character, and you'll see them speak AAVE as a marker for being lower class, uneducated, or angry. It's this reductive way of looking at a community that is so much more complex than that.
Right. One example that really stands out is the 90s movie Clueless. Now, it's not a perfect film by any means, but when you watch Dion and Murray, where Murray says, "Woman, lend me $5."
Woman, let me $5.
Murray, I have asked you repeatedly not to call me woman.
Excuse me, Miss Dion.
Thank you.
Okay, but street slang is an increasingly valid form of expression. Most of the feminine pronouns do have mocking, but not necessarily misogynistic undertone.
Yeah, and when Dion Davenport reminds Murray Duvenhall that she asked him repeatedly not to call her a woman, Murray connects the way he speaks to Diane, then explains with this quote, "My street slang is incredibly valid form of expression. Most of the feminine pronouns do have mocking, but not necessarily misogynistic undertones."
This line is so important because it shows how Murray's use of street slang is an expression of identity, not ignorance. And Dion's response is equally important. She's saying, I'll accept this form of expression, but you need to respect me as an individual. This interaction illustrates how language isn't just about communication, it's about power, respect, and cultural expression.
Exactly. What's happening here is Murray is claiming his identity through the language he uses, while Dion sets boundaries. They're not just talking about money, they're showing us how AAVE is valid and how it can be a part of a complex, respectful relationship. It's a way of asserting cultural identity while also navigating a broader societal expectation for proper English.
And what's great about this moment is how it pushes back against the idea that AAVE is only inferior or unrefined. By having characters like Dion and Murray challenge each other over their language choices, Clueless gets us to think about language as fluid and tied to context, not something that should be policed or reduced to stereotypes.
Now let's take a closer look at some of the articles we've been reading. First, in Mies Jansen's article, AAV as a class marker in American film, Jansen discusses how AAVE is often linked to social class in movies. When characters speak AAVE, they are often cast in roles that are supposed to represent the working class, poor, or uneducated.
Jansen's article is incredibly insightful. He points out that AAVE is often used as a quick shorthand to show that a character is from a lower socioeconomic class. The movie industry does this by default without considering the nuisances of AAVE as a dialect that is widely spoken by many successful, educated Black people. It's the lazy characterization of Black people and their language that reinforces harmful stereotypes.
Exactly. Jansen's article also ties AAVE to the idea that Blackness is often seen as other in mainstream media. By associating AAVE with negative traits like anger or silliness, films often keep Black characters in a box, furthering the idea that Black people cultural expressions is lesser unrefined.
It's a huge part of why we need to talk about this. The portrayal of AAVE in movies isn't just about language, it's about the marginalization of the Black community. When Black people's authentic language is stereotyped, it has real world consequences for how they are treated in society.
And it's not just media. The issue also bleeds into education. As Alice Filmer points out in her article, African American Vehicular English, Ethics, Ideology, Pediology, and the Conflicts between Identity and Power, Filmer explores how AAVE speaks, especially Black students are discriminated against in classrooms because their dialect isn't accepted by mainstream education institutions.
Right. Filmers argues that the idea of linguistic purism in education does not allow AAVE speakers to feel valid in the classroom. Instead, these students are pressured to conform to standard American English, which doesn't reflect their lived experiences. Filmer Filmer makes the case that this leads to psychological harm, as students are forced to choose between their cultural identity and expectation to speak in a way that is acceptable in those in power.
It's a cycle of discrimination that reinforces negative ideas about Black people and their culture. And we see that same bias in the way AAVE is used in movies to portray Blackness as something that's wild, unrefined, or inferior. That's why we need to push for a change in representation. AAVE deserves to be celebrated, not used as a tool of mockery. Let's also dive into chapter 7 of Rosina Leapy Green's English with an Accent, titled Teaching Children How to Discriminate, which was the inspiration for this whole video. Leapy Green emphasizes how society's attitude toward language reinforces prejudices and discrimination. She argues that, especially for children, language is a key part of how we define who is normal and who is other.
One key point Leapy Green makes is that children are taught explicitly and implicitly how to treat language differences. The way kids are exposed to AAVE or any non-standard English teaches them to judge others based on how they speak. Libby Green calls it linguistic discrimination, and she argues that it starts at an early age.
That's the issue. If kids see characters in movies constantly using AAVE as a sign of villainy, sickness, or unrefinement, they're internalizing that idea. They learn to associate AAVE speakers with lower status, and that bias stays with them.
It's subtle but impactful. Lippy Green points out how this kind of discrimination doesn't just affect how kids view others, it also impacts how they value their own speech. If they speak AAVE, they might feel ashamed of it, thinking that it's less valid than other forms of English. That's why it's crucial to have positive representations of AAVE and for the media to treat it as a valid and important dialect.
Now, what's really powerful about the two articles we've discussed and Rosina Leapy Green's chapter 7 in English with an Accent is that they all shed light on how language is not just about communication, it's about identity and power.
The articles dive deep into how AAVE is often misrepresented in media and how this portrayals impact how society views Black culture and language. Leapy Green chapter builds on this by explaining how these portrayals are not just incidental. They are shaped by social norms that dictate what's considered acceptable or standard language. Together, these sources highlight the critical role media plays in either reinforcing or challenging linguistic discrimination.
When we look at how AAVE is portrayed in film, as discussed in the articles, when they connect that Lippy Green analysis of how children are taught to discriminate based on language, it becomes clear that this isn't just a theoretical issue, it has real life consequences.
These sources work together to show that how language is represented in the media affects how we value certain identities and how we view different communities. So, understanding the interconnection between languages, culture, and power is essential if we want to move forward in a world where dialects, including AAVE, are respected and celebrated.
Let's move into some other movies where AAVE is used in ways that misrepresent the Black community. One movie we need to discuss is The Princess and the Frog. While Tiana herself speaks standard American English, there's a major character, Ray the alligator, who uses AAVE. Ray's speech is exaggerated, and his use of AAVE is linked to his silliness and lack of sophistication.
Right. And that's the problem. AAVE in characters like Ray is often used to suggest that the character is not serious or not educated, when in reality, AAVE is a rich, structured language with depth and intelligence behind it. It's not just a tool for comedy or stereotype.
Films like The Lion King take us into a world of African landscapes. Yet when we hear the characters speak, especially the hyenas, they're using AAVE, which is a distortion of African culture. Even though The Lion King is a set in Africa, the main characters like Mufasa and Simba speak with British accents, while the hyenas, often depicted as silly and villainous, speak with AAVE.
Exactly. This highlights the cultural disconnect and shows how AAVE has often been associated with inferiority in film. While the noble royal characters like Mufasa and Simba are given prestigious British accents, the antagonist characters like the hyenas speak with AAVE, reinforcing a racialized hierarchy based on how people speak.
Now that we've gone over the ways AAVE has been misrepresented in movies and how those stereotypes have impacted its perception, let's take a moment to talk about the shift we're seeing in the film industry. Things are definitely changing, and there are some exciting examples where AAVE is being portrayed more respectfully and authentically. It's important to highlight these positive changes because they show that we can break the mold and provide real multidimensional representation for Black characters in movies.
Exactly. One of the most exciting examples of how things are changing is in Black Panther. Unlike older films where AAVE was often used to show characters as less intelligent or comedic, Black Panther does a much better job at respecting AAVE. The characters T'Challa, Shuri, and M'Baku all have AAVE at different points, but it's the part of their powerful, multidimensional character development. It's not just slang, it's an integral part of their cultural identity, and that's huge.
Right. I mean, T'Challa uses AAVE, but he's also the king of Wakanda. His speech doesn't diminish his authority or intelligence. In fact, it enhances his character. And Shuri, who is brilliant and witty, also speaks in AAVE, but the way she uses it shows how language can be a sign of confidence, not a limitation.
Exactly. And let's not forget, M'Baka, he's introduced as a fierce, intimidating figure, but when he uses AAVE, it adds depth to his character. He's not just some savage warrior, his speech gives him layers. It shows his humanity, strength, and yeah, his sense of humor. It's refreshing to see AAVE being used in ways that don't rely on stereotypes, but show these characters as complex and multidimensional.
And I think what's so important about Black Panther is how it shows that AAVE isn't just for sidekicks and secondary characters. It's a valid, respectable form of expression for heroes and leaders. This shifts in how AAVE is portrayed in movies shows that the dialect isn't something to be ashamed of. It's something that people can use to express power and authenticity, not something that limits them.
Exactly. It's also seen in Spider-Man intro or Into the Spider-Verse. Miles Morales, a character who's Afro-Latino, uses AAVE, but it's never used to make him look less capable. It's part of who he is and part of his cultural identity. When he speaks in AAVE, it's not a joke. It's a statement of his roots, of his community. And just like Shuri and M'Baku and Black Panther, his language doesn't take away from his abilities or his role as a superhero. It adds depth to him.
Yeah, and that's the key difference. These films show that AAVE can be used to portray strong, dynamic characters where they're superheroes, kings, or tech geniuses. It's no longer just about using slang to make someone seem less serious or more comedic. It's about showing that language is a part of who they are and it's worthy of respect.
And I love how the hate you give continues this trend, with Star Carter, the protagonist, using AAVE to speak in a way that's natural and empowering. Her language doesn't take away from her intelligence or her strength. It's a reflection of her identity as a Black woman growing up in a certain community. And while it's portrayed respectfully, it also highlights the struggle of navigating between different worlds, being expected to code switch, but also embracing your roots.
Exactly. And this is a really exciting development in film, right? More and more, AAVE is being portrayed as a valid and authentic form of expression. The more we see characters using it in ways are respectful and empowering, the more we can push back against harmful stereotypes. We're seeing AAVE used in films where the characters are not char- characters, but fully realized individuals. It's respectful representation, and that's such an important shift.
It's so important because it shows that AAVE isn't something that should be corrected or fixed. It's not an indication of lower intelligence or poverty. It's a rich cultural language. And we're starting to see it portrayed in ways that reflect true value of the dialect.
Exactly. And with films like Black Panther and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, AAVE is no longer just a tool for comedy or to make characters look less sophisticated. It's a marker of identity, power, culture, and that's the kind of representation that needs to continue to grow in the film industry.
One more recent film that's worth mentioning is Zootopia. It's really interesting to look at the characters of Gazelle, the pop star in the movie, who is voiced by Shakira. Gazelle speaks in a more formal, correct way throughout the film, but what's fascinating is that the movie touches on issues of stereotyping and cultural differences, which is definitely something we should keep in mind when talking about language and identity. We see how certain characters are stereotyped by their outward appearance and the language they use. It's a great commentary on biases we have, but also on how identity and language are so intertwined.
That's so true, Hallie. What Zootopia does well is challenge prejudices that we often hold about different groups. And it's a good reminder that language can both reflect and reinforce societal norms. It's a little more subtle, but it still has an important message about how we view people based on the way they speak. Now let's get personal. I'll be honest, growing up, I never really thought about how damaging these portrayals were. I just thought it was part of the movie or part of the character. But as I've gotten older and started studying these issues more deeply, I realize how damaging it is to see AAVE speakers reduced to these roles. And it makes me think about how language isn't just words, it's how we view people.
When I was a kid, where AAVE was used for humor or to make someone sound street or sound cool, but I didn't understand how these characters were being reduced to one-dimensional stereotypes. Now I see how it perpetuates harmful biases. Imagine growing up in a world where they speak makes you automatically seem less capable. That's what's at stake here.
I think for me, it's about realizing that we all have blind spots. I had no idea how AAVE being used to push an agenda and marginalize people. I grew up seeing AAVE as something cool or fun, but now understand it has real world consequences. Now I'm more aware of how media can make people feel like their identity isn't valued.
And the more I've learned about this issue, the more it's made me reflect on my own biases. It's not just about speaking AAVE, it's about respecting that it's a legitimate form of communication. We need to push back against the idea that AAVE is lesser than standard American English. Now that we've explored how African American Vernacular English, or AAVE, is often misinterpreted in media and how that contributes to the marginalization of Black students in schools that prioritize standard American English, let's talk about what we can actually do about it.
First, we can start by recognizing that language is cultural, not just functional. AAVE is a valid, rule-governed dialect with its own rich history, grammar, and patterns. It's not wrong, it's just different. When we hear it, we should listen without judgment.
Second, we can all call out misinterpretation when media outlets use AAVE only to stereotype, mock, or simplify Black characters. We should ask, is this respectful? Is this accurate? Just noticing and questioning these portrayals helps raise awareness.
Third, we need to advocate for inclusive classrooms. That means encouraging teachers and schools to recognize the legitimacy of AAVE and other home dialects. Supporting code switching education, where students learn how to switch between dialects depending on context without being shamed for the way they speak at home. Promoting diverse literature and media in the classroom that represents a range of voices and dialects, not just SAE.
Fourth, we can uplift Black voices. That means reading work by Black authors who write in both AAVE and SAE, following Black creators on social media who talk about language justice, and just listening more.
And finally, we hold space for conversation. Language is a deeply personal topic, and if we're going to challenge discrimination and how people speak, we have to make it safe to talk about honestly. That includes listening to Black students when they say they feel silenced, stereotyped, or misunderstood in school.
So, to wrap it up, AAVE is much more than a form of slang. It's a cultural identity, and how it's represented in media affects how people see it in real life. We need to shift the narrative and start celebrating the richness of AAVE instead of associating it with negative stereotypes.
Exactly. By calling out these betrayals and pushing for respectful representations, we can start the breakdown of linguistic discrimination that is so deeply embedded in our culture.
And that means not only critiquing how AAVE is used in movies, but also supporting media that respects and elevates AAVE for its true value.
So, whether it's in a Disney film, a 90s teen comedy, or a Marvel blockbuster, we have to ask, how are we portraying language? And what messages are we sending about culture, identity, and power? AAVE isn't a flaw, it's a form of expression. And if we want media to reflect the richness of our world, we need to be more honest, respectful, and diverse representations of how people speak.
We hope this conversation has inspired you to think more critically about how language is used in the films you watch and the ways it shapes perceptions. Let us know in the comments what you think about AVE in media and why language matters.
Hit that like button if you learned something today, and make sure to subscribe to Lingua Framed if so you don't miss out on our next breakdown.
So stay tuned. We've got more coming on how language shapes identity, culture, and media.
Until next time, keep questioning what you hear and how it's framed. Thanks for watching.
Sounds good to me, guys.